I went out to the Balcones Canyonland Preserve area on the north side of Lake Travis, and I was about to take a step, and I looked down and saw that pattern, and the brain didn't even have to register rattlesnake. I had an audible cry out. I went, whoa, as I pulled back my foot from stepping on this diamondback rattlesnake, who was just pulling its body around to get its head pointed at me to bite, which it didn't do. You know, we had a standoff there momentarily before I just decided I'll just take a big circumnavigation around that. So that was kind of interesting. I'm Chock Woodruff. My position at the Bureau of Economic Geology is geologist. I do mapping. I do geologic hazard research. I also have a position as a senior lecturer in the Department of Civil, Architectural, and Environmental Engineering on UT campus, and I teach a summer course in engineering geology. So I sort of wear a couple of hats, or three hats to be specific. I have a consulting practice in town as well. My father was not a geologist, but he was a chemist, and so I guess in a sense I inherited some of that. I remember his having the soil map of Murray County, Tennessee that folded out in these splendid colors. And I remember it as a child seeing those and sort of wondering about it. It was kind of mysterious. Our neighbors had a 200-acre cow pasture across this stone fence from where I lived, and I would climb over that stone fence, and there were outcroppings of Ordovician limestone, and I would take pieces of that rock and break them and then look in my hands at what I was disclosing inside this rock and just thinking to myself, wow, this is really something. I was warned away from taking freshman chemistry at Vanderbilt because it was a course that was required of all the pre-med students and all the engineers, and it was a suitable course to weed out these people. And I don't know whether I would have been weeded out if I'd gone and taken chemistry, but instead I took freshman geology. I think the moment where it really started striking home was when we had a field trip where we got in a bus and drove away from the sort of urbanized Vanderbilt campus, crossed the Cumberland River in the bus and went into the northern part of Davidson County, which is Nashville's county, and got out of the bus and walked through a stile in the fence and went back to this outcropping of the Chattanooga Black Shale. And I just thought, it just doesn't get much better than this. After we took that field trip, I wrote this letter home, and I found the letter in my mother's effects after she died. And I looked at that thing and I thought, how did I ever even get in? I mean, the penmanship was terrible, probably the grammar wasn't good and everything, but I had an insight about myself where I said, we took a field trip this week. Maybe when I get home for Christmas, I'll get my rock hammer and start my rock collection. So I was disclosing some little insight into my inner self that told me something that my outer self had not acknowledged yet. But I was kind of like, I had to be beat over the head with a 2x4 to really allow myself to go with my passion, as it were. I went off to college thinking I was going to be a lawyer of all things, and I shudder at the very thought of it. But I was going to be a good lawyer. I was going to be Atticus Finch and not some sleazy, well, I'm going to get sued by some lawyer now when they think I'm talking about them. But I didn't actually become a geology major until one of my professors got me a job after the sophomore year with the Tennessee Division of Water Resources. And I did that until a fateful day in June of 1964. I had an accident in the car. I had a blind curve country road head-on collision with a car that contained 5 brothers, and I don't think the driver had a driver's license. The car didn't have insurance. It may not have even had license plates, I don't know, but one of the boys was thrown through the front window. No one was wearing a seat belt, and I performed Boy Scout first aid on him, where I put pressure on the arteries in his neck and stopped the bleeding, and I was credited with having saved his life. I wound up discovering after the fact that I should have had a rider on my insurance policy to drive the state car, and I didn't have that, and it resulted in my being a defendant in a lawsuit. And this lawyer was not Atticus Finch, and I went back to Vanderbilt and changed my major to geology. So I sort of became a geologist by accident. I had read, actually it was a Baylor geological study on the urban geology of Waco, and it had an introduction by Peter T. Flon. And I was so taken with that and his writing style and what he was saying that I wanted to come and study under Peter T. Flon. My first professional job was as almost like, they didn't call it geologic trainee, but I guess that's what I was, working for the Tennessee Division of Geology. It was such a sleepy little organization that I felt like there was more to it for me. I started to work for the Bureau when Bill Fisher had been putting together a team to work on one of the first sort of semi-big contracts that the Bureau had before the nuclear waste isolation came up over the horizon. And then the Bureau really grew, and this building we're in now was a manifestation of this growth. But when I came on, there was this contract job with the Texas Department of Water Resources that was spinning off of the Coastal Atlas, where they wanted to have an environmental geologic atlas of these river basins that feed the Edwards Aquifer and then the Carrizo-Wilcox Aquifer. That was a start with the Bureau, and I spent 11 years with the Bureau, went from 1972 to 1983. And when I left the Bureau in 83, I started a consulting practice. And I didn't know whether I was going to have anybody ever call me up and ask me to do work for them. I mean, it was really a gutsy move. I remember a lawyer was recommending that I get on food stamps, and that just shocked me. I didn't think I was going to need to be on food stamps, and it turned out I didn't get on food stamps. Not that there's any disgrace in being on food stamps, but I felt a little bit, semi-panicked. But then I had people coming to me and wanting me to work on environmental geologic problems having to do with the Edwards Aquifer, having to do with foundation problems or resource problems like quarrying sand and gravel for aggregate or stone or something like that. So I did that. I'm still doing it, but I did it in earnest until I came back to the Bureau part-time in 2012. So I have this 30-year experience as a consulting geologist. Always the thing that's running through my story, and when you look at it, it goes all the way back to being the kid crossing the rock fence and breaking pieces of limestone and looking inside it. It's like, so that's still going on. That's part of, I guess, my curiosity in the world. And the key words I would say that have been my almost like polar star with my career has been field trips. And that first field trip I took as a lowly student at Vanderbilt, and I came back and it was just like, how can it get any better than this? And I'm still doing field trips 60-something years later. When I was a consulting geologist and didn't have the support from the Bureau, I still managed to put together, to orchestrate, to lead field trips. And I've done over 30, I think, over the years. And even if I weren't at the Bureau, if I decide to, heaven help us, if I decide to actually retire and empty out my office and go to my other office in town, I'll probably still be leading field trips. It's what I do. There is a element of the common wheel here that I would emphasize. The tragedy up on the Guadalupe River is an excellent example for how one may define one's course in life. And stream hydrology, aquifer recharge, discharge, foundation strengths, slope failures, things like that. You have people that are in danger of flooding, or you have people who have problems with water quality that they may be totally unaware of that have to do with aquifers and recharge, and similarly slope stability. And all of those things have a play. Austin's a great place to do geology, but it's a place where you have engineering issues with our substrates. We have these clay mud rocks that are made up of these clays that shrink and swell. And so you have that, you have people's foundations that break up and this kind of thing, or you have slopes that fail. I would say, let's go out and look at it in nature. Let's take a field trip. Let's go to Pedernales Falls State Park, or let's go to Enchanted Rock and look at it. And the thing will either click with you or it won't. With my engineers, I see that. Some of them, you can see that it kind of clicks with them. From a personal point of view, I sort of marvel at digging down into your past to say, how did I come to be here? And of course, as I say, part of it was sort of inherited from my father, but he wasn't a geologist, but he worked with things that were related. His friends were geologists and mining engineers. And so I knew these people, that's what they did. But when I went to college, I had, in a sense, erased all that, and it was only through the intervention of this professor who taught the lab section that got me that job with the Division of Water Resources, which led to the car wreck, which led to my throwing out the concepts of wanting to have anything to do with the legal profession. And yet later on, as a consultant, I wound up being an expert witness and this kind of thing. But isn't it interesting how it's almost like stratigraphic layers or unconformities or facies changes, where you're over here doing this and then you cross a line and it's a whole different ball game.
Thanks for watching Meet a Geoscientist, a series by the Bureau of Economic Geology. For more information on this topic, check out the links in the description below. If you enjoyed this conversation, like and subscribe to discover more career paths in geoscience.